Welcome to PR Done and Dunner. I am Bob Geller, your host. Today we have a great guest, and a great topic. It's about breaking out of the box of the usual PR tactics to draw attention and build brand. And with us, we have Joe Dans, a Fusion PR alum and one of the most creative people in PR that I know and who I've worked with, and Michael F. Schein, author of the Hype Handbook. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having us, Bob. Yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Why don't we get into the Q&A? First, why don't you give a little bit more of a detailed introduction of yourself, and then we'll get into the Q&A yourselves.
Should I start or should me? Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, Michael F. Schein. It's fun. We were just talking before this started about where the F came from, but probably not relevant for here. But yeah,
we're sure it's not a pejorative, you know.
Well,
but yeah, no, like as Bob said, I wrote a book called the Hype Handbook that McGraw-Hill put out a little while back, where I basically look at all of the unsavory characters who are really the best marketers in the world, the propaganda artists and cult leaders and early rock managers, and I say, do they know anything we don't, and what can we do to ethically use what they know? And the answer is they know a lot. I also am a ghostwriter and a marketer, so I believe that one of the best things that you can do to turn yourself into a well-known commodity in your space is to have a certain kind of book with your name on it. And I also I've done various marketing things for a long time, which we can talk about.
Thank you. And Joe, your background?
Been in tech PR for quite some time, going back to my days with Fusion Public Relations, and that was a great experience. I've been running up my own business called the Road Wave Creative Group ever since then, and that's, oh my God, Bob, I guess it's been about almost 20 years, which is really frightening. But the other thing that I've done is I've done a radio show for the better part of 15 years. This is the 15th year of it. And it's on WTBQ radio up in, you can look it up at WTBQ.com. And I do a show about creativity and technology solutions for business and life. So I always found it very helpful to be creative in the tech PR space. And I've interviewed hundreds of people now talking about creativity and technology. And it's given me a really good experience in terms of not only just the creative public relations that I've done, but creativity in a lot of different spaces. So it's given me a unique perspective talking to these people, and I'm sure I could bring that to the table.
Well, that is what we're here to talk about today, and maybe I should back up and just explain the premise for this episode. I previously had Ben Gutman on the show, and he wrote the book Simply Put, and it explains how to break through with clear and simple communications. And one of the cornerstones is to be salient or be noticeable. And, you know, it's kind of easy to say that. He offered some nice tips, but in the world of PR, it's a whole different challenge. So I wanted to find out more, and he introduced me to Michael Schein, which I was very happy to meet. And Michael, and also I went ahead and read the book, the Hype Handbook, and let me tell you, it is a fantastic read. There's so many great examples, you know, lots of actionable tips. And getting back to the challenge, though, in PR, we know journalists are incredibly busy. They're swamped with PR pitches. What are the tools we typically rely on? Okay, some of us get a bit more creative, but often it gets down to the press release, the email pitch, maybe a byline article. And hype is something we sometimes want to stay away from. Our clients maybe try to push us to hype, but we try to stay away from it. So it's interesting, Michael, that you have, you know, chosen to write a book about hype. Maybe you could tell us more about the specifics. I mean, how it works, and what are some of the principles of, you know, the Hype Handbook.
Well, there's two questions there, right? There's the piece about PR, and there's the piece about what hype is. So the way I define hype is any activities that get a large number of people highly emotional so that they'll take the action you want them to take, usually in groups. And the people that we think of as quote unquote bad guys they just tend to understand it better on average. It's not that these strategies themselves are immoral strategies. It's just that human beings are not rational. And a lot of people who aren't, I don't know what you would call it, corner cutters, what I call hype artists, a lot of people who play by the book, they deal with the world as it should be rather than as it actually is. But there are some notable examples. I mean, Martin Luther King used these strategies. Oprah most certainly uses them. People that are really admired. It's funny about the PR thing. It's actually quite hilarious that creativity and hype and those sorts of things are considered in a different universe from public relations. Because if you look at the origin of public relations, a little bit of history that I learned from researching the book, and I talk about this in the book, the guy who created the term public relations was a gentleman named Edward Bernays. And he is the opposite. If he would have known that PR has mainly become press releases and annoying people until they write about you, he would have laughed you out of the room. This guy was all about generating emotional reactions from people to break through the noise. So a few examples. There was a huge taboo on women speaking. He was active smoking. He was active in the 20s. And the way he got around that was he sponsored a march for suffragettes, for feminists of the time, called Torches for Liberty, where he basically had women light up as you can't tell me what to do, right? So as a result, women started smoking and they unlocked half the population. He got Americans to eat bacon. He commissioned a study from a doctor to uh, basically say that bacon is the healthiest breakfast food because it replaces the energy that you lose during sleep. And they sent it to every doctor in America. So this guy was morally dubious, but he invented the term public relations. He was the first public relations executive.
That is kind of hysterical, but we have to get back to those days. I mean,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, probably all of us would agree. That's kind of like the fun side of the business when you could
Yeah.
really, go outside the normal routine and tactics and, mix it up a bit, try to get creative.
The other thing he invented, I just have to say this, he created what's called the pseudo event. So if he would have a hotel opening, if you send a press release out that says, "Hey, we've got a new hotel opening, our client, can you write about them?" Okay. What he would do is he created the ribbon cutting ceremony. Now it's news. A ribbon cutting ceremony is taking place for a new business in town because newspapers write about news. They don't write about people's products. That's what we forget. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Let me, what about Ben Franklin? You
What
know,
about Ben Franklin?
him in his time as a person who developed his own content. And
Mhm.
I see a lot of things today moving towards creating content, not that it's all hyped up, but good content that educates people, that informs them and, helps you build your brand. And you've got to do that in a very careful way. It could be content that you produce, a video, again, things like that. And Franklin back then was one of the first purveyors of that, I think.
yeah. Mhm.
Did he
That's
have a
right.
PR rep or?
He was his own PR rep. He used to write under. He would write under pseudonyms, and what was it? Poor Richard's Almanac, and people followed that back then. There wasn't a lot of good
Wow.
content, but he invented it. He was brilliant.
People talk about the Michelin's Guide as one of the first examples of content marketing. I didn't
Yeah.
know it goes all the way back to Ben Franklin. That's hysterical.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant, and people want to be informed, and that's one way. My background is also in being an MBA and working with brands. Public relations has to support the brand. It has to support any electronic media outreach that you're doing today. We've got to be storytellers too. Storytelling is very important. It's always been that way, and it should continue to be that way.
I love that you brought up Ben Franklin. Another thing about him is that people think of him as this folksy, down home guy. He was a media mogul in every way. He owned the entire supply chain. He not only created the content, he owned the printing presses. And then it wasn't an accident that he was the first postmaster general. He controlled the roads and the postal system that sent the newspapers.
There you go. He's putting Elon Musk to shame.
Right.
But literally, he was a genius in that way, and he recognized, like you said, all those components that were out there. Years later, Churchill, right, when Churchill was being kicked out of public office, people said to him, "How do you think history is going to treat you, Mr. Churchill?" And Churchill came back and said, "Quite well, because I plan to write it," and he did. So
Great line.
Again, creating content, but it has to be credible content, has to be real. It can't all be hype.
Well, Michael might disagree.
I think I gotta say, I define hype differently than other people. I kind of co-opted that word on purpose.
Yeah.
In most places, the word hype, it comes from hyperbole, which means exaggeration, right? And that's not what I'm advocating. Where I actually got the word, marketing used to be a meaningful word, but it's a really not meaningful word now, because you'll meet marketers who don't realize that their job is to get attention, to get people to buy things. They're like, I'm really good at building conversations on X or Twitter with hashtags or Instagram. Like, to what end, right?
Yeah.
So that word has become really denuded, right? And so to me, where I got the word hype to replace that is from hip hop, because in hip hop, the word hype has always been a positive, because if you think about the history, it comes from the South Bronx, which is the poorest zip code in the country. You had people with no resources. They didn't even have enough money for instruments. They were using record players, which we call turntables now, and they created art. And it's always been considered a positive that you use what you have to get attention. So that's really where I borrowed the concept of hype from.
That makes sense, but a lot of the examples are very questionable characters. Let's face it, and it has a bad word. Wouldn't you agree that hype has a little bit of a? I guess, are you being a little bit irreverent with that, or it's an attention getter? Just using the word is an attention getter, right?
100%. I mean, I'm being irreverent with it. I'm trying to get attention. I'm doing my own medicine. I think there's a couple of things. One is, I truly, truly, truly believe there was a moral imperative for me writing the book, in addition to my interest and everything else. And it's that the people who, the more unsavory characters in the book, they understand this stuff. I can't tell you how many clients I've had who are so resistant to getting attention because the work should speak for itself. They're hiring a marketing company and they still don't really feel comfortable with marketing. And what I'm saying is, so here's a good example. Warren Buffett and Charles Manson both learned their strategies from the Dale Carnegie course. And one used it to create a mass murder spree, and one used it to become the most respected financier in the United States. But if you strip the details away, the psychological tactics that they used were the same. So I would rather put these tools in the hands of more creators and make that concept palatable so that the bad guys don't get all the attention.
That makes sense. Maybe to give us all a better understanding, could you share just a few of the, I think you said there's 12 cornerstones or principles to being a hype artist?
Yeah, one that starts the book off, and that I think is, if you could only learn one, this is the one to use, is make war not love. And it basically says that people are more attracted naturally to messages of being against something than being for something. Now, that can be really nasty, right? We're seeing that in the media now when someone comes on and marginalizes another group. Racism comes from this. I mean, there's all of that. However, it is how we are. And this can be used in a very positive way. So I'll give you an example from the business world, from a company that I really respect. So there's a company called Basecamp, and it's a very boring field, although it's an interesting company. They own a project management software, like a customer relationship management and project management software. And they came in when Salesforce completely owns the space. Yep. Salesforce invented cloud-based,
CRM.
CRM,
That's
right? Basecamp, but to use Salesforce to its full capacity, it's so complicated. You have to get a consultant. It does about 1,005 different things, right? Basecamp does about five things. And so, okay, one type of person, because it's simpler to use, it's easier to use. That's one way to market it. The guys who started Basecamp, Jason Fried, and they call him his name's David Heiner. I forget. It's a long name, but his
Yeah, yeah.
partner, excuse me. But they were even more sophisticated. They wrote a book called Rework, and Rework had nothing to do with project management. It was about going against all of our certainties about work. So they say things like, fire your workaholics. I mean, everyone in the business world, you have Elon Musk out there talking about this is a multi-billionaire, the richest man in the world. I sleep under my desk. That's how hard I work. They're saying, no, if someone's a workaholic, they're not efficient. Fire them. He's saying when your customers, I forget how he said it, when your customers say jump, tell them to go scratch. You know what I mean? He's basically saying if they tell you to add another feature, tell them no. Why did he do this? Because by picking that fight, it's inevitable that you'll use their product. Their product does all the things that the new business world is telling them to do. And Basecamp is the kind of company that people will wear on a t-shirt. It's a
Yeah.
really hip, cool, beloved company. And this is a business to business customer relationship project management company.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. It's have bold stands, draw lines in the sand, don't be middle of the road. It is so essential. You will just not get attention otherwise.
Differentiate, right? That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, but not saying there's differentiate is part of it. Differentiate is our thing is really simple to use, unlike Salesforce, which does more.
Yeah.
But drawing a line in the sand or picking a fight is everything you know about work is broken, and you're screwing yourself by doing business the way you do things. He picked
Yeah.
a fight with the common business wisdom.
Yeah.
There's,
Well,
there's, go ahead,
I
Joe.
was going to say one of the strategies that I've always worked on to get creative ideas is something called reverse assumption, where basically you take something that's the norm, like those folks did, and you flip it on its,
I love that.
on its petard, and then people are attracted to that. For example, I had doing a campaign one time. We were trying to support customer service, come up with some creative ideas, and I said, well, we could normally talk about good customer service, but that's boring. Why don't we do a bad customer service and have the people in the group talk about bad customer service, which was more fun? And then I flipped it further and I said, look, I want you to go out because people love movies. And I said, go out and find quotes from different types of movies that are kind of against the grain, but fit them in with what we're talking about here. So, for example, if you're a customer service person, you might take one from a movie where you'd say, okay, make my day, right? Or, things like that were the opposite, but made it fun and made you think more, and obviously those guys are thinking more. That's great.
I think that's really smart.
I mean, a lot of these tactics, first of all, it sounds like you're intentionally trying to be a provocateur in some ways.
Absolutely.
May be very appropriate for the startup, the challenger that has to, or the person who's unknown who has to get out there and grab attention, right? Would you agree? Rather than the big brands, or are these tactics appropriate for people who've already gotten to a certain level?
I think big brands kill themselves by not using these tactics. I see so many companies float on their fumes for so long. I'll give you an example of a very big company. I mean, they're probably owned by an even bigger company, but a very big brand that did this fantastically and did something that shouldn't have been done. They resurrected a dying brand, Old Spice. I mean, probably, what was it, 15, 20 years ago? I mean, when I was growing up, I'm 47 years old. When I was growing up, Old Spice was what your grandfather wore, and not in a cool way. I mean, it was this decrepit, it was there with next to Vicks Vapo Rub in the cabinet, right? So, okay, they were still around. There were a lot of old people, but a lot of World War II veterans, but that brand was going to die along with them, right? What did they do? They said, the world has gotten so, as they used to call it at the time, metrosexual, right? That everything is primped and preened and hairless and gutless and all of this stuff. what if we reversed assumptions and said maybe the old man features are exactly what people love about this, the chopping wood, fighting in World War II, and what if we exaggerated it? So they hired that guy Isaiah, whatever, muscular, and they totally exaggerated. Yeah, who would be like on a horse with a torch and throwing,
Right.
spears and all of this stuff. That got all this attention, and now people even forget that's why they like Old Spice. I have Old Spice deodorant, not ironically. It's popular.
Trying to remember the
Yeah.
commercial. I think I remember I'm not sure if I remember the commercial. Were they marketing to women as well?
Well, they might have been marketing to women that like wanted their men to, because women make purchases, right? But
Mm.
they were marketing to like rustic manhood, but they did it with irony. Because you
Yeah.
weren't supposed to do that. You were supposed to market to the
Okay.
young and the hip, and this was,
Yeah.
all of this, and they didn't do that.
But in that case, they needed kind of a brand rejuvenation, right?
Right,
It's, I think,
right, right. But you
um,
got to wonder, like, every brand is going to need a brand reju. On one hand, if your marketing is working, keep going with it, right? I mean, the Wall Street Journal used the same direct mail letter for 50 years. At the same time, one day you're going to die. If you just keep doing the same, every fashion goes out of fashion. Every one.
yeah, 100%. Joe, I know do you have any other tactics to recommend as far as getting people to be creative?
Yeah, drilling down, getting your people to be creative listeners and observers. I think it's very important, not only to, for example, with startups or not even startups, but startups in particular, go out and talk to the people, find out the stories about them, how they got to where they are. You have to know the product, but you also have to know the solution for the product, or even, what's the pain point? A circle around the pain point, get people to talk about it. As Mike said before, you could find out interesting, very interesting things from doing that. But again, talk to the users. How are they using it? One of our clients years ago was a startup. It's called Magnolia Broadband, and I was hard pressed for finding something about them that was interesting to get them out there. One day I was walking through their facility because I had to go visit them we were in New York and I'd go to New Jersey. I was walking around their facility and I looked in the back and there was half a person hooked to a board. And I looked at it and I said, "What is that?" And they were like, "Oh, that's nothing." But I said, "No, that's something for sure." And I said, "I'll bet she even has a name." And it did have a name. And what they were doing was they were taking something that reminded me of cell phone test dummies. Remember the crashes where they used
Oh,
to
yeah.
crash them? And I said, "Well, what are they?" And they said they were driving around. They were driving around New York City using their software chip technology to find out which cell phone tower was the best one that your cell phone should adhere to. And Bob Geller,
I remember
I,
this. I do
I,
remember
I,
this.
I went to the Associated Press. I went big here. I said, "This is a cool idea. I want to get it. I want to get worldwide coverage if I can. I'll offer it to them. It's just something for them because I think it's that kind of a quirky story. I always look for quirky stories. So I came up with cell phone test dummies, cruise New York City looking for a good connection. So there's a double entendre there. It's fun,
Yeah, that's cool.
provocative. In this day and age where you can't call people anymore, you need something that's going to be different and provoke people to be interested in it. And what they did was there was a young gal who was an intern there who was working with the top tech writer for the Associated Press, and she liked it. She fought for it. And then one day while I was on vacation, Bob came to me and he said, "They're willing to, if we bring the car into the city and drive around with it, they're willing to write about it." And they did. And one of the people from Magnolia Broadband had been traveling 2 days later after Bob took them around and they wrote the story off our pitch. It appeared on the second business page in her hometown in Taiwan, which is just absolutely cool. So it had that type of replacing people component, how the technology was going. And this is a company that eventually made more money selling its patent rights than doing other things because it was a fabulous semiconductor company. So that was really cool. But it came from drilling down, listening to them, and putting together a story which was kind of hype but was really cool, you know?
Well, see, that was very Edward Bernays. You created an event to report on, not just hounded people to write about the business, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I mean, you need to do a little hounding, right? But I
Yeah.
love the creativity involved with that.
It was fun, and the picture of these folks appeared all over the world. Later on, when it came to credibility, they could point to the fact that as a startup, they were covered by the Associated Press. There were other things we did for them as well, but that was one of those things that was done by digging, by having your people learn how to dig, listen, observe, and that's how you get some real big breakthroughs.
I love that. Everything about that.
Yeah,
And
me too, 100%.
we had one other client of ours, and this is probably one of the best campaigns, one where we won a PR creativity award for it. Was we had a campaign where before people did everything on a cell phone, the cell phones were just coming out. We developed a pitch, and it was called, and this is where trends are important, and you have to get ahead of the trend and introduce people in it. And it'll sound quaint today, but we were in Chicago introducing one of our new technology partners, and we came up with something called, will that be cash or cell phone? And the people loved it, and it was brilliant. It was such a brilliant piece that would work today, sending it out to people who'd sit there and go, I think I know what they mean, but that's kind of cool, so I'd like to see what it is. Got fantastic coverage, TV, radio, you name it. And they did very well introducing the company, but that's where you have to be out there listening and connecting the dots.
Now, Michael, you have a marketing agency, right?
Yeah.
Are you still doing marketing consulting?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So my company is called Microfame Media, and for years I don't think we ever did things in a conventional way. We always used these strategies, but we had sort of the conventional setup, where we had account managers and creative directors and the whole thing. And when the book came out, when the Hype Handbook came out, because before that no one knew what hype was other than the negative connotations that you had. But I became, I was fortunate. The book did well, and so I became known as the hype guy. So people started calling me up and saying,
It's a brand.
yeah, it was really fun and continues to be fun. So people started calling me up and saying, can you give me help us hype ourselves up? And I got even luckier because I did not realize this. This was dumb luck. But in the venture funded startup space, they use that word all the time. They'll always say things like, our product is great, but we need to hype ourselves up to get our valuation up. So a lot of people were typing hype in and finding me. So
that's great.
We started doing a lot more consulting around these concepts than the straight campaigns. And then what happened was people would come to me and say, okay, we need to get attention for our company, but we also need to get attention for our company leadership because as you guys have both alluded to, companies need to have a face now, especially idea-driven companies where this is the guru, the thought leader, whatever. And we would do that work with people, and time and again, they didn't have a book. And they would say to me, well, can you do the book? And I was, no, I don't do that, da 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 da. But it happened again and again and again. And I realized that you don't just have to have a book. You have to have what I call a Bible. It has to be a high concept book that says this is exactly how everything you think about your corner of the universe is wrong. This is the new paradigm. So like the 4-hour work week, the whatever, 7 habits of highly effective people. So one client was bothering me so much about it. I'm like, I'll do your book. And we blew it up. I mean, it was the most effective thing we could have done. So then we did another and another. So now a vast part of our business is ghostwriting these sorts of high concept books for clients.
I will keep that in mind because we sometimes run across ghostwriting needs in our business.
Well,
a lot of executives want to build their profiles, and a book is a good way.
For some kinds, what we realize is it's really essential. If you are an idea driven, like if you are known as an expert and you don't have that, you didn't write the book on it, so to speak, it's harder to sell yourself that way.
It really is about credibility. And to get out there and be a thought leader. I mean, that's very important. There are, all niches. And I think that's kind of where you have to go in a lot of instances. Who's the niche leader in, let's say, creativity? You want to be one of those cutting edge people. Technology is such a broad space. Creativity is not, so
Exactly.
it's getting out there.
We live in such noisy, polarized times. What worked last year, 5 years ago, might not work today.
True.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, do you feel like these tactics continue to be effective? And is there ethical considerations in terms of maybe some might want to use it for bad hype, possibly?
So yes, and I think that there's a difference between tactics. There's two questions. I'm going to answer the first question about do they go out of date, and then I'm going to answer the question about the ethical. And I do have strong thoughts on both. As you can tell, I have strong thoughts on everything.
That's why we love you.
I couldn't tell.
But I think that tactics go out of date quickly. So whenever I see someone, for years back, it was this whole thing with the ticking clock. Do you remember that? It was set up sales funnels, online. It's you set up a sales funnel that takes you to a PowerPoint presentation with a thing called a benefit stack. It has to look exactly like this. Then there's a landing page with a ticking clock and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, you can't fail if you do this thing. And the minute I see that, I say to myself, it's already too late. Because there's going to be a gold rush. Everyone is going to do this same thing. And now if you see that ticking clock, it just reeks of spam. It just reeks of that you're being sold because that everyone has seen it. So that's a tactic. And those things go out of date all the time. I mean, I remember when blogging first started, it was huge. And then everyone started blogging. I remember my dentist had a blog. And when I saw that, I was like, this thing is going to die, right?
Everybody has everybody quote unquote has a podcast. I mean, those are things that the real difference is where you have really good content.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the content. I mean, these are just. I mean, the mechanism is agnostic. You know what I mean? I mean, you can have a book or a podcast or a blog, but that's like saying I'm going to be a star because I have a pen and a typewriter, right? It's about what you put in it. But I think that human beings are going to be wired to be attracted to conflict. They always have been, and they always will be. I mean, it's why novels do well. It's just how we're wired. Human beings are wired to look for authority signals. So I think there's and I don't think those are ever going away. I think that they're the human animal. I think it's the same reason we can hear a bunch of notes in a certain key and think of it as music, right? The trends of music change, but music as music, we all know what music is. And Joe, I didn't mean to cut you off. There was a second question, but I forget what it was, and I'll shut up.
Second question, I think, was about the ethics of it. Good hype
So
versus bad
I'm
hype.
very serious about that, and I've wrestled with it a lot because I hope you'll take me on my word for this, but I want to make the world a better place through my work and through my writing. And in fact, that was part of why I wrote the book. And I think if the given is that these things work, how do you use them ethically? And what I always say is we run everything, and I run everything through an ethical framework. So I will not deceive, and I will not leave people worse off than I found them. So if I'm picking a fight online, to use that example, and it's about smearing a human being for their looks or their family, all publicity is good publicity, that is abhorrent.
Yep.
But I'll pick a fight with a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. That makes a lot of sense.
One of the things about the media today, and I've been a member of it for a long time, is there's a constant drumbeat. You're talking about tick, 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 tick. People just end up getting moved from one thing to another. They talk about the attention span of a goldfish, which is like 2 or 3 seconds. And sadly, I think part of the problem is with electronic media is that people don't drill down. They don't read more about the story. They'll move from one thing to the next. And that's actually frightening.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't educate my people, to think that way. The media drumbeat is there's always a crisis on right now. Everything's a crisis. And it goes back to, I think, what you said before. And we have to sit back and look and say, what's going on? And that's really important. And I always ask people to do that. Sit back for 5 seconds. Don't get blasted by the hype. And just think about what's going on here. What did that person just say to me? Does it make sense? Should I be emotional about it? And I think one of the problems is we don't do analysis of information anymore. We don't do critical thinking. We react emotionally. And that might be a fact of life, like you said before, because people do get very emotional about things. And that is playing upon, their natures too. So, from a journalist perspective, I have a problem with that. At the same time, you're doing public relations, so you want to keep this going.
Also, the journalism model now, I mean, you guys know this better than me, but it's completely incentivized by the wrong things. I mean, when it was a subscription model, you could write a long feature article, but if it's a clickbait model, getting people inflamed is what pays the bills, right?
100%. Pushing emotional hot buttons. There's been probably a big loss of trust in the media. It's polarized, as we know. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So in many ways, our job is not succeeding because of or with the media. It's succeeding in spite of the media.
Right.
I mean, I always remember AP standards, right, Bob? AP standards.
Exactly.
AP doesn't have standards itself anymore. They don't report who, what, when, where, how, and why.
No, they don't.
I look at words in there and I say to myself, reminds me of a bad PR piece where you've stuck something in there. Report the news. Let people make up their minds for it. Let us be
100%.
creative as public relations people to come up with a good story about somebody who solved somebody's problem, about great technology, about trends, so that you're ready. The reason why I did the show about creativity and technology is because technology is wiping out a lot of people's opportunities to do things. So they have to be creative to set themselves apart from other people moving forward. And it just can't be going on ChatGPT and saying, hey, do this for me. No, it's got to come from you. And that's the same thing with public relations. You need to get in there and be a journalist, be a PR person. There's certainly a little bit of the hype in there. It has to be. And do it that way, One of Bob's questions a while back, I think he was going to ask you was, what's the elephant in the room, right? And the old question I have, is how do you eat an elephant? And the answer, of course, is one small piece at a time. And
for elephant.
We have to
tastes like
smart.
Chicken, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we have to be, as public relations people, and I put my public relations head on here and journalist head here, and I try to connect the two of them and eat that big elephant one point at a time by being creative and come up with something that's interesting that grabs another journalist's attention.
So am I on the dark side or are you on the dark side? Because they say when you're in PR, you become a journalist. You go to, no, actually it's the other way. If you're in journalism, you go to PR, you go to the dark side. I think it's sometimes the other way around. But anyway, Joe,
it's become the, I mean, PR is PR, right? Clients deserve a shot. But the fact that there's no distinction between journalism and PR right now is challenging. Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, we need a more cheerful note to end on. Help me, please, anybody.
Making stories interesting, educating people. Okay. And you can do that. You can do it in a nice, refined way where they don't even know that it's hype. If you're going to use that hype word, inform them, entertain them, make something fun, funny, and entertaining. And you can do it. When I talked before about the cell phone test dummies, there was a double entendre there. They're looking to make a good connection, not only with a cell tower, but maybe with another dummy,
You might not be able to get away with that these days.
Yeah, you probably will. We won't even get into all the genders of dummies and things. But again, there's no reason why you can't do that. and make it fun. I mean, one of the things I put in there was, no, this isn't another Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, coming up, and you could have fun with it. And people, one of the things I used to do really cut through a lot of the mess was I would send out mailers with my campaign. I sent out a bottle mailer one time. It had a parchment in it. And this was back when everybody was, doing emails, just starting to do email. And they said, I love this. I got something different. It had a parchment with the pitch in it. It had some candy. It had the program, ZSoft 2.0. And people loved it. It was different. You got to get back to some of those basic things. Maybe it's snail mail to promote something you have to set yourself apart.
This is what I love about the field. It'll bring us full circle because I started out with this about the idea of making it fun and exciting. Maybe taking a page from the ad world. I'm a big fan of the show Mad Men.
Yeah, great. One of my favorites.
Big ideas, why not in PR as well?
You could do that. We did a mailer once when I was at Fusion Public Relations. And what I did was we knew that, and this goes back to knowing your target audience. And what we were doing was flight simulators, promoting a flight simulator client I had up in Montreal. And what I would do is we would send out like a booklet. We'd send out some other fun things. And we knew that pilots loved history. Like one of the programs that I was promoting was basically one that involved these flight simulators that had been revitalized, these aircraft. They took mothballed aircraft and they turned them into simulators that saved people's lives later on in the virtual world, which was cool because these planes had been sidelined and we went down and drilled about the history of them. The pilots loved it. They knew this plane had crashed, but it had second life again. It was romantic to them because this plane had a second chance.
Very cool.
Anyway, I guess we'll wrap. And thank you so much for joining the podcast. Everybody should read the Hype Handbook. Michael, I assume Amazon. Do they go to a website or what's a good place?
Yeah, no, I mean it's in all of those places, Amazon and all of the digital places. It's in quite a few Barnes and Nobles as well.
Fantastic read. I enjoyed it so much. Check out Joe's radio show. What is it again, Joe?
It's you can go to WTBQ.com. It's on the AM and FM bands, but I would go to WTBQ.com. It's on Wednesdays from 11 to 12 o'clock. And, in the next few weeks, we'll interview Mike.
Hopefully have Michael on.
It should be a great show.
I love it.
Any last thoughts? We're good?
Be creative. Think out of the box. and that's how you differentiate yourself and your organization, So read as much as you can. Look at trends.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insight. I'll leave your information in the show notes and look forward to staying in touch. Have a good one.